Hello and welcome to another video from the Conscientious Biologist, and this should be the very last one that you're watching in phase one. It's the last video that pulls together loads of the concepts in phase one to give you a really good overview and understanding of biology, of the key points in biology. So this is called What Do Cells Need? And it's a summary and overview of essential biology. As I've said, it completes phase one of the GCSE programme. It's a really nice way to just close up that unit, help you to review stuff, help you to learn some techniques for how to revise it all before you go on to phase two and adding more detail on. As always, please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Thanks. So if we're asking what the cells need, there's some other things that we need to consider first. So let's review what they do, because that will inform us what they need. So let's throw an animal cell back up there, and then you'll recognize that from the cell biology lessons, and we've used that same diagram in several of the videos. So if we look at the key things that a cell has and the key things it needs to do, you might remember that the most important thing that a cell needs to do is make protein. That's why it's got the membrane and cytoplasm to make it a contained little unit. It's got DNA, which is the instructions for how to make the proteins, and it's got ribosomes that can read the genetic information to make those proteins. So lots of those things are set up for that. The membrane, the cytoplasm, the ribosomes, and the DNA. The nucleus is to protect the DNA. You've got mitochondria to do the respiration. You've got a vacuole, small and temporary, remember, in an animal cell, for storage of anything else that's useful. So we know from that two of the key processes there are to build the proteins and the aerobic respiration. So I've put both of those in yellow for you. Let's pull up a plant cell, and I've already labelled there. You can see we've got build the proteins and we've got aerobic respiration already marked there. But remember, plant cells have got an extra process that's just come up in yellow there, that's photosynthesis. So we've got some of those key things, but we'll add to that because there's some other stuff that we've covered within this unit. So we know we've got protein synthesis as probably the most important thing. We know we've got respiration, generally aerobic respiration, but remember these cells can do anaerobic respiration when there isn't enough oxygen. We've got photosynthesis, that's a key process that happens in plant cells. But think about some other really vital things that cells need to do if they're going to stay alive and continue making more cells. The first one is growth and mitosis, and of course as part of that process you've got DNA replication. As long as you can replicate your DNA, double the quantity, double the size of a cell, you can share it out to make 2 new cells, and that process just keeps going to increase cell number for growth and repair. So really those 5 processes over there, those are the essential things the cells need to do. So we just need to think, when we're thinking about what do cells need, is what do they need in order to do those processes. So is it easy to get those things? Let's jump to that next. Well, you might recognize this slide from the circulatory system videos. I've adapted it a bit, but the principle is still the same. If we consider a single-celled organism, so just there I've put that single blue blob to represent a single-celled organism. Now every bit of its surface is in touch with its surroundings, so diffusion and uptake is going to be high. So to get all the things that it needs for protein synthesis, respiration, photosynthesis, growth, mitosis, DNA replication, it's going to be easy. They can just move in through the membrane. Any waste products can move out, no problem at all. However, if we consider a multicellular organism, so as soon as we've got more than one cell, we're multicellular. If I put a loop of cells around that one, suddenly it's more difficult because it's only those outer cells that can absorb nutrients by diffusion or active transport, remember, if it's against a concentration gradient. So to get to the middle cell, they need to have gone through the outer cells, then past that middle cell. That's not very efficient for that middle cell. It's not going to be getting as much nutrients. It's only getting what's left over from what those outer ones will pass to it. Well, of course, that's not many cells for any multicellular organism. So let's think about adding another couple of layers around that. And we'll mark that middle cell in pink just so we can really keep track of what that middle cell is. Well, look at the difficulty now. It's only going to be those outermost cells that can absorb anything. So for that middle cell to get anything, it's got to go through a lot of cells to get there. That cell in the middle still needs lots of things for protein synthesis, respiration, photosynthesis, mitosis, growth, DNA replication. So how's it going to get there? So this is why in multicellular organisms, you need a circulatory system, some kind of system of transport to take stuff there. So we're still adding to this question of what do cells need by thinking about, well, what do they need because of what do they do and how are they going to get that stuff that they need? We're starting to link the whole phase 1 topic together now. So what we're talking about really here is the need for specialized systems for absorbing and transporting what they need. But this is the key point. You really need to have a great understanding of how a multicellular organism, in particular humans, that's what we're really focusing phase 1 on, how they provide for all their cells. So it's not just what do they need, it's how are those things provided. That covers almost all of phase 1 if you can answer that properly. So let's try and build that up in stages. We're going to build up a mind map here. Now I'm hoping you've come across mind maps before. You may have used them for a revision. They're a really, really good way to try and consolidate your knowledge, but also really, really importantly to bridge between topics. If you've watched the Steps to Success video, which should have been the first one that you watched in all of phase 1, that tells you how I like you to learn. That's building up your understanding, building up your knowledge, building up your bridging, which is linking topics together. That will really help you with your understanding and your wisdom in biology. So this will hopefully help you to do that. So let's think about what cells need. This is a summary of multicellular animal life. So if I throw a cell in the middle there, I'm not going to worry about putting the nucleus and all the other bits in there. Just that blue blob, that's representing a cell. So if we're talking about what do they need, we need to also consider why do they need it and how do they get it. So let's start with the obvious ones, okay? Glucose and oxygen, they need those for respiration. It's one of those vital key processes. So for both of those, let's think about why do they need it? It's from that box over there. And how do they get it? Well, both of those we know. For the why, it's respiration to get energy. You need the glucose, you need to react it with the oxygen to break the glucose molecule back down into carbon dioxide and water to release the energy that was locked up in the glucose through photosynthesis that happened in plant cells. How is that done? So how do they get the glucose and the oxygen? Well, how for oxygen is through the respiratory system. So you need to revise and review that. How for glucose is its digestion of carbohydrates. Remember, carbohydrates are polymers of sugars, and those are then absorbed in the small intestine. That's how they get into the blood, and it's then transported around the body. Let's look at another one here. Oh, sorry, just for completeness, I'll put on carbon dioxide there. It's moving out. We're talking about what the cells need, but just for completeness, let's have carbon dioxide on there because it's given off as the waste product of respiration. Let's put the next one on there. Really, really important one, the amino acids. Now, hopefully you remember from the proteins videos, amino acids are the monomer units for building proteins. Proteins are built out of amino acids, just like a house is built of bricks. Okay, amino acids are the monomer units. So that then kind of answers the question as to why we need amino acids. It's because they're the monomer unit for building proteins, and proteins do everything. How do you get amino acids? It's digestion of the proteins of other organisms. So almost everything you eat is cells of other organisms. If you're eating meat, you're eating the cells of animals. If you're eating anything plant-based, you're eating the cells of those plants. Those cells will have had their own proteins that were doing the jobs for the cells in that organism. So when you eat that organism's cells, you're breaking down its proteins to smash the proteins back into their building blocks so you can reuse them as building blocks for your own proteins. That's the kind of key essential point of digestion. So go back and watch the digestive system videos if you haven't done so already. Moving on then to nucleotides. Trickier one. Nucleotides are the monomer units of DNA. So we said in one of the first slides, a key process that cells need to do is DNA replication. That's part of mitosis. Well, they can only make more DNA if they've got the building blocks to build the DNA out of. And the building blocks for that are nucleotides. And in the same way as you get your amino acids, you need to get them from food. So when you're eating the cells of other organisms, you're also eating the nucleus and the DNA within those cells. So you digest and chop up the DNA of other organisms to get the nucleotides to rebuild them into your own DNA. It's actually really cool that everything is just recycled. When you eat the cells of other things, you're recycling the nutrients they've already made. So how digestion of DNA for other organisms? Let's jump on. Fatty acids and glycerol. These are the products from digesting lipids which are fats. And again, where do you get those from? You get them from eating other creatures' cells. And you need lipids for energy storage in your own body, but also for building membranes. Membrane is built of lipids. So if a cell's going to grow and increase its amount of membrane, you need lipids to build that membrane out of. And again, how it's digestion of lipids from the cells of other creatures. We're just recycling those same things. Water. Cells need water, so water needs to move into cells. But water also needs to move out of cells. It can go in both directions. Remember, water is a waste product of respiration. So the cell, if it's doing lots of respiration, is making lots of extra water. You want to get rid of that. But sometimes cells are a bit dehydrated and it needs to absorb water. So it's in both directions there. And remember, that's all about osmosis. Why do you need the water? There's loads of reasons. So we're not going to list them all off. But not least, you need water for making the cytoplasm so that there's liquid inside the cell so everything can float around. How do you get it? Largely from drinking. You also get a lot of your water from food. So obviously if you're eating these cells, there's the cytoplasm of those cells that you're eating, which is largely made of water. So a huge amount of your food is water. So don't just think as the water that you take into your body is drinking. There's also a lot of water in the cells in the food that you're eating. Okay. Next ones, I've paired these two together and I've only really put them on there because it's a basic part of nutrition. But minerals and vitamins, there's not a lot you need to know about these though, really. You get them both from your food. Some people take extra tablets, extra supplements from these, but largely you get them from your food. Why do you need minerals? Minerals is really another word for elements. So they're things that are on the periodic table. And they're key parts of various structures and proteins. Lots of proteins and structures and things in your body need other chemicals, other elements to allow them to make their completed form. So you need to eat those minerals from your food so your body can use them in other things. Vitamins are more about helping processes work in your body. So for example, you might need vitamin C to help your immune system to work properly. Either way, minerals and vitamins help your body to keep functioning properly. Now that's quite a lot of information all over this slide. So take a screenshot of that, do that now so you've got that to add to your notes. But then consider, is this enough? Even though we've got all of the main things that the cells need, all those yellow arrows, they all come from things that need to enter the cell. And those are all the fundamental things. That's a lot of your course. But does this cover enough information of your course? No. So we need to keep mapping that out. So let's shrink all that down and we'll bring that back, that exact same information, but I'm going to bring it back smaller in the middle of the page because we're going to keep mapping outwards from this. And this is a really good way to revise. Put something central in the middle, and it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be a cell. You could have just put glucose in the middle and then link to that and go, well, glucose used for respiration. Glucose comes from carbohydrates, and you can just keep branching out. But this is a really nice overview way of doing it. So let's put some more information. Let's go back to the oxygen thing. We've said why it's for respiration. So let's put up the equation for respiration there. Let's get that on there for completeness. We've got the word equation and the system. We say that in the exams. Let's add to it even more though. It's through the respiratory system, but that's gas exchange. Well, gas exchange in the lungs. So let's think about more detail of the lungs. So the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, the alveoli. The alveoli is the site of gas exchange with diffusion. There was a whole slide, several minutes of the lesson on respiratory system just about what's going on in the alveoli. Let's remember that respiration is an exothermic reaction. It gives out energy. These are all extra key details. Digestion of glucose. You've got mechanical and chemical digestion. Mechanical digestion being the actual smashing down, so things like chewing, the churning in the stomach. Chemical digestion by enzymes. So you've suddenly got to think about all your enzyme theory as well from the proteins lectures. You've got to think about carbohydrates as the key enzyme. So why does carbohydrates break down carbohydrates? Think about the lock and key mechanism, about the active site. There's loads more detail there. For DNA and nucleotides, we're talking about those nucleotides being broken down, the DNA being broken down using nuclease to get the nucleotides. The DNA is a polymer of those nucleotides. That happens within the cell cycle, the DNA replication, in stage 1 of the cell cycle, if you remember back from the mitosis video. We jump across to proteins now. Well, protein digestion is done by protease enzymes. One specific example is the pepsin enzyme that you find in the stomach, which is weird in itself because the stomach's full of stomach acid. That the amino acids, like everything else, get absorbed from the small intestine. So think about how the small intestine's adapted. It's got those villi and microvilli to increase its surface area to maximize diffusion. There's so much extra detail there. That you've got active transport once you've lost your once you've got to your equilibrium point, once you've lost your concentration gradient. Go back to the videos on diffusion if you can't remember that. It's transport through membranes 1 if you need to look it up. For breakdown of lipids, you need lipase enzyme. Well, lipase was made by the pancreas along with loads of other enzymes. So go back and revise the role of the pancreas. Think about the role of bile in the breakdown of lipids and what bile does. Why is that involved? It's because it neutralizes the stomach acids to make a better environment, better pH for the enzymes to work. And emulsification of the fats to break them down to increase their surface area. Again, all that's in the digestive system videos. We're just mapping extra detail onto this. All the water stuff is all about osmosis. Go back and look up all about the osmosis. Let's just put a couple of bits in with the minerals as well. There's only a couple of things I'd like you to know. But the iron as a mineral, remember I said the minerals are just elements. Iron you need because it's a key part of hemoglobin, which is in the red blood cells, because your red blood cells carry oxygen all around your body. You also need calcium as a mineral, because calcium's in bone cells. It's what makes the bone cells really hard and solid to give you your skeleton, that you can use your muscle cells to pull your skeleton around. Muscle cells, go back and look at the specialist cells video. It all starts to link up together. We're not going to worry about vitamins because there's a whole load of them. And you don't really need to know much about what they do. When you come to the disease unit, in phase 2, there's some stuff on deficiency diseases when you're lacking vitamins, but at this stage we're not going to worry about them. So there's a load of extra information that we've mapped on top. Take a screenshot of that if you want. But we're not done. Let's fade that out once more and we'll bring back that last page smaller so you can see we've got all that same information. Let's do a last little mapping out. This is just really trying to make you think how everything in the unit should be starting to come together. So straight back down there to the oxygen thing. Ventilation is the process, that's breathing. So the breathing that was done by the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, it's about changes in pressure and volume in the thorax, how they move. There was a table on that if you go back to that. That respiration is done in the mitochondria, so we're linking your cell biology in. That we've also got all of anaerobic respiration to think about for when ventilation isn't providing enough oxygen. So go back and revise all your anaerobic respiration. With mechanical digestion, we mentioned it a minute ago, chewing, churning in the stomach. Peristalsis, that squeezing movement throughout your entire digestive tract, still adds to breaking things down. Chemical digestion by saliva, by stomach acid, and by all of those enzymes. It's a huge amount of information there. The DNA and the nucleotides, once they form polymers of DNA, they're going to form chromosomes. That those are the individual structures. Remember back to the mitosis one, you've got single chromosomes and double chromosomes. Try and remember what those are and how they fit in. The whole process of mitosis and how those chromosomes are then separated is really, really important. We mentioned before that pepsin is made in the stomach. Well, that's weird because enzymes need specific pHs, which are generally neutral. So what's the effect of pH on enzymes? And if we're thinking about the effect of pH on enzymes, we ought to be considering the effect of temperature on enzymes, which is a massive bit of knowledge. You've got collision theory in there, you've got denaturing of enzymes, it's linked to the shape of them and their active site. Really important with proteins, you've got the whole protein synthesis stuff to think about, which comes in the Proteins 1 lecture. That's an absolutely vital bit of biology. Protein synthesis being done by ribosomes, so you're still linking in cell biology. The role of bile, that bile is made by the liver. The liver has various roles. They're all listed in the anaerobic respiration video. The last slide on that is all about the role of the liver because it plays a key part in anaerobic respiration. Red blood cells that are about carrying oxygen. Now, while we're talking about carrying oxygen, because that oxygen's got to be sent around, notice on everything that's here so far, we've totally neglected anything about the circulatory system. There's nothing on here yet about the names of the chambers, the arteries, the veins, what they do. We could link all of that to everything here to say how it's transported. We're not going to, or this would get just altogether too busy. Okay, but there's a vast amount of information on this slide that you must know. And really remember, everything in biology comes back to just providing for that cell. That's why I've left it there right in the center of this picture, because everything that's branched out, you can see, you could track it all back. It's all just about how do you keep that cell alive, because that's all biology is. It's the understanding of how multicellular organisms in particular are all set up just to provide for that cell. So take a screenshot of this if you want, but even so, this is nowhere near detailed enough to cover everything that we've looked at in phase 1. So you might want to take a screenshot of this, stick it on the middle of a piece of A3 paper and see how much more you can branch out from it. But I'm trying to get you to understand it does all link together. You can pull everything together. You could bridge between all the topics, and it does all make sense because all of it just comes back to providing for that cell. So well done. You've just hit a major milestone in this course. You've hit the halfway point. Phase 1 is complete. What you should have done then is now go back and address those 4 of the 5 main questions that I gave you in one of the first introductory lessons in the pre-course playlist. So that was, what are cells, what do they do, what do they need, and how do they get what they need? If you can comprehensively answer those 4 questions, then you've covered most of the bones of biology. Yes, there's still half of the course to do, but all of that is building on the knowledge that you've got through this phase 1. So it's so essential that you've got this phase 1 really well. Otherwise your understanding of phase 2 just isn't going to be there. So let's just recap what we've got on those. So what are cells? You've covered that in the cells 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 and 7 videos. That looks at what they do, how they're put together, what all those different structures within them do, and then the microscopy stuff with the light microscopes, the electron microscopes, resolution magnification, all of that stuff. Okay, what do cells do? That's covered in cells 5, which is the mitosis one, if you can't remember. Proteins 1, 2 and 3, photosynthesis 1 and 2, and respiration 1, 2 and 3. Those are some really important lectures in that section. What do they need? That's this PowerPoint, the one that you're just watching now. That looks at how they get all that stuff from, it looks at sort of why, and it puts it all together for the what do they do. It's what do they need so they can do that, and how they get it. It really links it all up together. How do they get what they need? That's more the physiology stuff. So you've got the digestion, respiratory system and circulatory system lessons, but you've got the transport through membranes lessons and the surface area to volume ratio ones. That's how stuff is brought into the body, transported around and delivered to those cells so they can do what they need to do to be functional proactive cells. Now that's 26 videos in total. That's a lot of stuff that you've learned. Now when you consider each video is sort of 15 to 20 minutes long generally, that's just over 7 hours of stuff that you've watched. Now that might seem a lot, but when you consider that's half your course, that's essentially the majority of year 10. My 7 hours here, given that most people have 2 or 3 hours a week, that basically is 3 weeks worth of lessons totally covered in just these phase 1 videos. Now, of course, we don't have the question and answer sessions, we don't have the discussion, we don't have the written work, we don't have the notes, we don't have the interaction that you would have in your lessons. So these absolutely can't replace your school lessons. Nothing will ever replace face-to-face with a teacher. But this is a really good deal for you guys in that you've got half your course, certainly enough for your year 10 exam, covered in just these videos. So hopefully they've been really useful. Your foundations should now be really strong from watching them, so build on that. Next, you need to answer that 5th all-important question is, what's the result of all that? What happens next now we've got those cells? So that's when you're looking at everything on, well, how do those cells now develop? So you're looking at sort of evolution through time. How do they pass on their knowledge? So you're looking at all the genetics, all the inheritance stuff. How do they fit into a wider ecosystem? How do these multicellular organisms that are built of these cells interact with other multicellular organisms? So you're starting to bring in adaptations and competition and everything in ecology. So there's a huge amount of stuff still to come. So what I want you to do is go to phase 2 and really bulk out your knowledge and become a really good rounded biologist. The only thing really left to say from me is a massive thank you. Thank you for sitting there. Thank you for watching your way through these videos. Thank you for participating. Well done. You're at a really strong point now. The next thing that I suggest you go on to is to look at the skills lessons that I've built you. Things on concluding and evaluating, planning, investigational skills, but also how to demonstrate your knowledge in exams, how to analyse questions. So those are really important things that you need to have. That's where I suggest you go next. However, you may decide you want to go straight on to phase 2. If you do that, go ahead. It's looking back at DNA and protein synthesis in a little bit more detail. Whichever way you decide to go, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this. And I really hope it's been useful to you. Take care, guys. Good luck.